Hello and welcome, Exiles, to the update to the Cold.Glad. I know it's been a while, but here's the thing. The update I wanted to do to this character required quite a bit of currency, which I didn't have at the time. So over the last few builds, we played the game, generated some more currency, and we were finally able to make this update, which the update is turning it into a champion. The idea is we are trading the 90/90 effective block for Blood Notch. The only real difference between these two things is with the good block, you have stun immunity and you mostly defend against all hits, generally speaking, whereas Blood Notch says you don't just mostly defend, you always defend. The system between Blood Notch and Petrified Blood effectively makes it so your character, if you take a damaging hit and it doesn't one-shot you, your character will perfectly sustain. The idea is Blood Notch can give up to 60% of the damage you took from a hit back to your character if it's a stunning hit. You can force every hit on your character to always be a stun with Valerium and a very low energy shield pool, and then you combine that with Petrified Blood, which gives you a damage diversion where it says 40% of all hit damage will get diverted into a degen over 4 seconds. So if 100% of the damage is taken, 40% is diverted into this degen, 60% is what's left over, and Blood Notch can perfectly sustain this. Now you'll notice I don't have a perfectly rolled Blood Notch, I have a 54%. That's because the unfaltering node recovers the rest of that portion I am missing. And the reason I'm grabbing this mastery is because you need hits against you cannot be critical strikes. There is a situation where if a hit is a cold damage hit and it's a crit, the game has some inbuilt code that says if a hit would have the chance to freeze you, it can't stun. And a crit technically rolls the freeze chance on a monster's attack against you, and this protects against that. That's the TLDR. It's just kind of some weird buggy interaction between stunning hits and freezing hits not being able to be on the same hit from an enemy. But this mastery solves that. So we recover all of the damage of that 60% portion left over. What do we do about Petrified Blood? We get damage recoup. If you have at least 30% damage recoup, you can perfectly sustain Petrified Blood. I went a little bit overkill and I have 4 jewels with recoup on them. Technically, you only need 3 to get to that 30% mark. I have 44. A little bit of extra recoup is basically helping our net sustain in case there's some degenning things going on. Like, for example, let's say we're being Shaper beamed and we're getting hit by Shaper balls at the same time and we're standing on the Shaper ground degen. The idea is we'll get some net recovery from the Shaper balls hitting us that will help us sustain the degens. Because the only real danger this character has is degens and things that kind of break your recovery. So that is the idea there behind going for a bit of extra recoup. The other thing you may have noticed is it was a magic jewel. Why are we doing a magic jewel? Just simply put, min-maxing a life-based character. You can't really compete with Adorned. There's not that many things in the game that give percent life in competitive amounts compared to Adorned. So that's what I went for. Some of the final points on this build is for some magic jewels to get dot multi, life scaling, and a bit of implicit value. All in all, this setup is tankier than the Glad, but it's quite a bit more investment with the Adorned and the voices. All in all, I don't think it makes the character that much stronger, and it still fails the super endgame check. I wanted to see if this character could go to doing quad ghosted feared, and quite frankly, a dot build probably can never do quad ghosted feared unless you can afford to generate a ton of hits and use like a life gain on Hitwatcher's Eye. The reason being is feared has things like Awakener's Desolation and Embezzler's Torment mod, which are things that can turn off your recovery entirely. Essentially meaning if you get hit by some of those things, all of a sudden your recoup isn't working, your regen isn't working, and even though you're sustaining the hits very efficiently, you're just going to get degen downed and died. It works flawlessly in terms of a defensive kit for basically any hard, very rippy map mod content, whatever you want. We can tank a memory game with a Blood Notch setup, which I think is quite insane, but it's just not gonna matter for a quad ghosted Feared. So it did fail the final end game check, unfortunately, but that was always going to be a long shot. I like to, if I have a character I well invested to, I like to see if it could pass that check, and it did not. Another thing I want to note is you'll notice this energy shield over here ramping up and down. Why is that? We have 90-80 res thanks to part of the keystone from Corruption's Embrace, Everlasting Sacrifice. This thing says, if you get to full ES, I will sacrifice your ES and I will give you 5 max all res. That applies to Chaos and Ellie for 4 seconds. All you need for this combination is the Valerium Ring, which helps us get the stun immunity. And then on top of that stun immunity, or not stun immunity, sorry, it makes it so you easily get stunned to help for Blood Notch. It gives a tiny amount of flat energy shield. If you aren't doing, you can even do this on the Glad setup, quite frankly. All it would require is just a little bit of flat ES somewhere, and don't grab this node melding. It gives too much ES. And the process is you get just 1 Abyssal Jewel with flat ES regen, and that should be enough to give you a full capped off ES every 4 seconds consistently, so you have permanent uptime on that Everlasting Sacrifice buff. You also notice we're using the Darkseer. This is just to be a bit more tanky option. Foulborn Toolborn is still much the offensive option. This is probably about 20% more damage. So you definitely still have this option if you want it. I just wanted to showcase both because this is a tank option if you want to go a bit more higher HP. And that's what we showcased today. Editor Lance cutting in the video because I forgot to cover a very, very specific weird thing that I'm going to get asked about, which is, why am I using a medium life flask? What is that for? So when we swap to champion, we now have access to first to strike, last to fall, which gives adrenaline for 20 seconds when you reach low life. Now, we are permanently on low life. We are low life. How do we make ourselves not low life so we can quote unquote reach it? The only way to go and get your life above this amount is something like a life flask. Specifically, I recommend a instant life flask, because if you just have a life flask with a little bit of recovery, the RF damage is going to outdeal it, I believe, and you won't actually tick as being full life. Whereas an instant life flask will put that flat amount on right away in 1 tick, and it will give you the proc to be not on full life. The reason for medium is it's the best in terms of charge consumption. For example, a Divine Life Flask costs 15 charges, so that means it's going to take you longer to generate 1 use of the flask, whereas a medium flask only takes 8 charges, which is quite a bit less. A small flask, I don't think does enough flat life to give you more regen than like 1 server tick of RF, so I don't think it was working for proccing it. But just to showcase this, I'm going to press the life flask, and you'll notice we instantly have adrenaline, and that's what that's for. So yeah, just cutting that into the video. Anyways, take care with the rest of it. So yeah, that is the final conclusion to the Glad, and it became a champion. Let me know what you guys think. I just wanted to finally get this update video because I finally got the currency to test the setup. It's strong, but ultimately not quad ghosted viable, which is the bummer. And the one thing I will say while I was playing this, although it's very good sustain wise, playing with immutable plus the stun stuff, although it feels generally good, sometimes occasionally you'll start casting a cold snap and you'll get interrupted, and cold snap has a cooldown, and that can kind of feel a little bit annoying. So that was one thing. That was one caveat to the setup altogether. All in all, that's the update. Hopefully you guys like it. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Stay tuned because the next thing we're working on is Cast on Crit Archmage. Take care, Exiles. Peace out.